Welcome again. I am continuing with the 1001 scripts. We are into section, actually I should probably change that. We're into section, just double click on my snipping tool. I think it's scribble tool or snipping tool. This will be 4, and even though we've done more than 4 scripts, we're on to this section of it. We're going to be looking at breps and meshes, and I want to show you some particularities about those basic params. What they mean, and I hope that that makes sense to you. I'm still using the plugin Bifocals, which I download so I can see I can see icons while these words, and I'm actually going to introduce another bifocal plugin. And I don't think plugins are that essential to get them all. Just once in a while you're going to need them. So I'm going to be using a closed mesh, which only comes from Control Alt, hold it down, and you'll see I have a Pufferfish plugin here. And if I just leave it, hover over it, you'll see that's Pufferfish with a whole bunch of wonderful attributes. So we're looking at params very simply, and we're looking at 2 simple things, Brep and mesh, and what that inspires. So let's zoom on out. Let's go back into shaded. We will make it so nothing's visible, and let's jump on in. What I've done is basically with Brep is I've made a bunch of Breps, and there they are. And in doing so, I made a circle. I made a sphere. Pretty simple. Circle, sphere. I want you to notice one thing. As you take a circle, put it into a Brep, it becomes a surface. So you don't have to take the circle, put it into a surface, and then put it into a Brep. Little subtlety, and I wanted to show you that. Sphere with a different radii can go directly into a Brep, but sphere can also go into a mesh. And that is not the same as going from mesh spheres into Breps. So think about that. You can actually take your you can take actually everything. You can take this, you can take your circle into a boundary representation, which will close it into a surface, and that's even under the mesh tool. So that's very interesting to think about, but keep in mind you're producing a mesh, whereas you're producing a trimmed surface. And that's a big difference to know, and that took me a long time to wrap my head around. I'm not one to be in the fabrication, even though I came from that analog in casting metal, but I've stayed to NURBS over top of mathematical surfaces over top of, well, it's still mathematical mesh surfaces. I'm not really one to work in faces and edges and vertices, but I certainly like points. So what we're going to do with that is we're going to move one up and have control over that going up and down. And what I'm going to do is show you a little bit of the what most people want to know right away. And so that's why I'm throwing it in here, even though I don't use them very much at all. I think all differences in unions and trims should all happen in line and surface. Regions long before it should go into booleans in a sense of what you were doing in Rhino. So let's take a solid difference, pretty cool. Solid difference generates that Brep just between that surface and that sphere. A solid intersection is going to give me the bottom half. And just think about that. I'll leave it at that. Think about that. What does that mean? A union is pretty cool because it not only makes a union of that oversized circle, but also makes this hollow, which I think is concave. So that's very interesting to think about what you've actually made when you bake that. You've made a concave area. So something to think about. Nice little tool. And of course you have the ability to take that and slide that through the radius, not only of the circle, changing the circle of the circle radius. You'll see how that has effect. Actually, I don't have it set to rational numbers. I have integers. So now you can start to see how that affects that as a piece of geometry. But also in the same breath, how do you raise and lower that to make that geometry? So something to think about. What I'm then going to do is take the geometry, move that one, and put it into a split Brep. And what does split Brep do? I dispatch and shows it makes 2 sections. It makes this section, and it makes this section. And it keeps them hollow. Wonderful, wonderful way to make a little tiny bowl shape that you can offset to normals or extrude to normals, and you have a wonderful simple vessel made from simple split Breps. Oscar, be a little quiet, please. And we got the oldest one here, 10, making noise. Split Brep multiple was pretty interesting. So I went in, and instead of just splitting it the same with a single one, I decided to move it in a bunch of directions by a awesome gene pool, which I love to randomize. I think it's pretty cool that you can set it, go into the gene pool, and edit whatever you have to do. And I produced those Breps and those Breps, and of course you could just put a cap holes on it. Oscar, please. Okay? You can cap the holes, and you have these wonderful discs that's related to whatever you choose to do in moving, these around. That's going to affect the whole thing as you slam those through. And you can also go back to the sphere and change the diameter of that. Wonderful way to gain control over some pretty cool stuff. Now let's show the difference. Oh no, we're not quite done yet. let's go into making a sphere smaller, and I can actually divide that, and I can make that sphere in relation to the other one. I can move that, I put it in a polar array, and I can use that against that other circle right here, which I've used so many times, and I can do a trim solid, and you get all these solids. So all I did with that was it's very nice with a trim solid to throw on a cap, and you've got this wonderful form right here. Pretty cool, and you can also influence that by taking your count, dividing the size of that inner circle to change the size of those holes. Of course, there is a breaking of the script if you go too far. That going up and down is going to change that as well, the size of those discs. And you can also do your number count. So depending on how many you want to cut out of that, and keep going until it actually starts to break the script as well. So that's it. A nice polar array. And I haven't used any plugins, but I showed basically how Breps work. Now let's do the same thing with meshes. Let's grab a mesh surface, which is makes by a numbered face. 1, 2, 3, 4 will make that square mesh. And this mesh does that with a boundary that's already been set as a rectangle, width, and a height count. And notice meshes don't go in the Breps. They certainly go in the meshes. Notice mesh spheres do not go into Breps, but they do go into meshes. So I can't be dealing with the Brep tools, not that I would want to anyhow. Let's do a solid difference, same thing. A mesh difference, let's do a mesh intersection, same thing as above. Let's do the mesh union, same thing, hollow, very interesting to think about. And then let's go in and realize how it complicates a bit. I've done this a little different. I grabbed the solid, and I grabbed a variety of these points that I can move around by my gene pool. I haven't taken them into the negative, but I can do that in the negative direction. That wouldn't be hard to just type in negative, and I'll add that on just as show you this is all about play. Nothing has to be done. Let's take it top and bottom. Now we have double. And now let's see what that does. And that makes a whole bunch of things. And I'm just going to keep it simple to that, and deal with what I had before, knowing I can put that in. And usually what I do here is I throw a little, oops, I don't throw a graft on it. I usually throw a little group tool on it if it's playful. And then I'll go off and just hit the color, and I'll put it in something that I remember I want to use, say yellow. So that's something I can play with. It's not danger, but it's something that, not set up, but could be. Now look at this. We take that tool and we dispatch it. And we dispatch it into these sections and these sections. Keep in mind what I had to do different with that. I don't have a cap. I can't just throw a Brep on top of there. It doesn't work with the meshes. And you've got some pretty ugly triangle meshes here, which you might want to figure out a way to simplify those as you go. And you might have overlapping ones because of the gene pool. You might be reading this as we go in and randomize again. You'll get all these. You never know what's going to happen when you do 100% randomized. 10% is going to give you a little more control over what it was and how it changes. 1% is just going to change it a little bit. So gene pool is an awesome optimization tool, I think, but I use it for geometries all the time. Then I'm going to take my closed Brep. And you're saying, where does that come from? Control Alt, there you go, Pufferfish. That's where it's coming from, and that's where you would have to download a plugin. There's many tutorials online how to download plugins. I'm not going to go through that, how to open them up and put them in your libraries, and go in and make sure that they're all active, or you have to go into each one as you drag it in the library and hit blocked, and then you have to hit unblocked. So basically that's it. I did the same thing with meshes that I did with Breps. Didn't let any stone go unturned, I don't believe, and I'm happy with that. 8 minutes in, and we're going to go hard into a couple things next, which will be mesh faces, dealing with numbers, not points. And the plankton mesh I know absolutely nothing about. I've looked a little bit online and realized there's nothing online for me so far. So I've got to go figure out who plankton was, what this means, how I can use it. And there is a plugin, I believe, on plankton. So that's where I'm going to start my research. Hopefully I can keep plugging through these first sections of params. Keep in mind that we're only here. We're only like, oh my gosh, we're here. And this is ridiculous. I haven't even gotten through, and I've made 4 videos with, 4 scripts in each one and applied them. Of course, I have knowledge of the other nodes. I've been through that several times. But I'm a year and a half into, a year and a quarter, not even 2 years. This Christmas will be 2 years looking at Grasshopper for the first time in my life. And if I'm this far in my head, I think I am evidence and proof that the idiot with a plan can do what the genius can do without one. And you can put me wherever you want in that circle, and I know where I put myself. Drop your ego and get into this and find out what you discover. You don't know where the applications will be. And I do have a solid following. I've hit 300 in a month of, I believe, real serious grasshoppers, and if I can call them that. I was a fan of Kung Fu, so, David Carradine's pretty awesome. I think his son was Canadian. Anyway, that's enough of that. I'll talk